to stay around even after we conclude this service in just a bit. For now, I want you just to help me invite Alison as she comes up to share a word. So let's welcome Alison as she comes.
Good morning, everyone in the room, and also to those of you who are joining us on our live stream. It's so good to be here with you this morning. So we are currently in a series called Money and Work. And to help us think more about this topic, today we're going to take a look at a passage from 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians is one of the epistles, letters written by early church leaders to specific faith communities that is included in the New Testament. This letter was written by Paul in response to issues that had arisen in the church in Corinth. Now, we don't know exactly what those issues were, but it seems from Paul's response that there were a number of divisions and quarrels in the community. So the section we're looking at today was meant to give the Corinthians some perspective on how to think about the many different ways that individuals can contribute to a church community. To help them realize that while individuals may contribute different gifts or serve in different ways or hold different positions, that they are all meant to be working toward the same goal, which is service of the common good. And to help them remember that all of their contributions, though they may look different, are empowered by the same Spirit. So this lesson remains relevant for us today as we think about participation in our own church community. And I believe it's also relevant to how we think about our contributions to the world at large through our work in its many forms. So Paul wrote, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we are all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit." Paul introduced an extended metaphor or an extended analogy comparing a church community to a human body. In the same way that a community has many individual members, so does the body have many parts. Both in a community and in a body, these parts are connected and interdependent. So despite their differences in status and ethnicity and so on, Paul drew attention to the fact that the members of the church in Corinth shared the same faith and were connected to the same Spirit. Today, as we expand our view of this passage's implications, we can consider what all people of the world share in common. Despite our many differences, all members of the global community are made in God's image, have infinite dignity and worth, and are loved unconditionally by our Creator. And we are all interdependent. Due to globalization, events thousands of miles away have an impact on us here in New York City, and vice versa. We share one planet, and how we treat it impacts all of us. But it can become easy to lose sight of this shared connection. The passage says, "Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, 'Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, 'Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body." So this is a pretty ridiculous image, right? I mean, first, it's a bit strange to think about body parts talking, but if they did, it would be crazy for a foot to think that it was not part of the body because it was different from another part, like a hand. If I were talking to this foot, I would probably be like, well, foot, you may say you're not connected to the body, but you still look pretty attached to me. And have you ever actually seen a body made up entirely of hands? There's a lot of variation in what human bodies look like, and they are all blessed and beautiful in their diversity, but I've never seen one that looked quite like that. I'm not sure what her inspiration was, but sculptor Adrian Arleo created a piece like this called Embodiment 2. Pretty interesting, right? Perhaps the more important questions to be asking the foot are, why do you feel like you are not part of the body? What happened to make you believe that you are so much less important than the hand that you might as well not exist? We can only speculate, but I wonder if the hand received a disproportionate amount of attention and praise. I wonder if the foot ever had been seen for what it was instead of what it wasn't. I wonder if the foot had ever been supported in discovering its own strengths and unique ways of contributing to the body. It can feel silly to speculate about what a foot might be thinking or feeling, but let's not forget that we're actually talking about people here. What might lead a person to feel that what they have to offer is so unimportant that they might as well not exist? What might lead a person to feel like they are not seen, are not appreciated, and do not matter? That's what we need to be paying attention to. Paul went on to say, if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. If a body were made entirely of one part, its functions would be severely limited. This is pretty obvious when we think about a body made only of hands. Such a body would not be able to do many things like taste or hear or smell and so on. But how does this apply to the realm of work? As Charles spoke about last week, we have a tendency to elevate certain forms of work over others. The same way it seems like the hand was elevated over the foot in Paul's analogy. When it comes to work, we do this both by giving certain workers more esteem and by giving certain workers higher compensation. In our society, surgeons are one of the most highly esteemed and compensated professions. Now, don't get me wrong, I have had multiple surgeries and I'm incredibly grateful for their expert care. But can you imagine what our world would be like if we only had surgeons? Society would fall apart. First of all, surgeons actually need support from a lot of other professionals like nurses and anesthesiologists and imaging technicians and medical suppliers and so on in order to do their job. But even more so, if everyone were a surgeon, how would we eat? What would we wear? Where would we live? How would we prevent the spread of disease? Who would lift our spirits and help us to make sense of the world? And so on. A society only made up of surgeons would be as limited as a body only made up of hands. And yet, we often lose sight of this reality when it comes to how we treat different workers in practice. For example, let's consider the case of the sanitation workers in Memphis. In 1968, 1,300 Black sanitation workers in the city of Memphis went on strike after 2 garbage collectors were crushed to death by a malfunctioning truck. This incident was the latest in a long pattern of neglect and abuse. Sanitation workers were often forced to use dilapidated trucks, to work overtime with no pay, and received wages so low that many were on welfare and hundreds relied on food stamps to feed their families. The striking workers were fighting for safer working conditions and fair pay. During the strike, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed a crowd full of sanitation workers and their supporters, delivering a speech called "All Labor Has Dignity." He said, "So often we overlook the work and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. One day, our society must come to see this. One day, our society will come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive. For the person who picks up our garbage in the final analysis is as significant as the physician. For if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity." Let's really take this message in. Whenever you're engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. All labor has dignity. And not only does all labor have dignity, we all need each other and are dependent upon each other's work. The physician needs the sanitation worker as much as the sanitation worker needs the physician. We are all interconnected, and all of our contributions impact each other's ability to flourish. Paul made this point in his letter to the Corinthians when he said, "The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I have no need of you,' nor again the head to the feet, 'I have no need of you.'" No, we all need each other. But it is not enough to just know this intellectually. This knowledge must inform how we treat each other individually and how we pursue justice collectively in the world. Paul said, "On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect, whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another." Paul is saying that as Christians, we should intentionally seek to engage in ways that counter harmful human tendencies to devalue certain groups of people. This is applicable in many areas, including work. According to Paul, when we see the world treat certain workers as less than, we should seek to elevate them and give them even greater respect and honor as a sort of corrective. Paul concluded this section by saying, "If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it." Have you ever noticed that when one part of your body is hurting, it can affect your entire body? I've noticed this in my own struggles with endometriosis. Pain in my pelvis and abdomen has led to pain in my back and shoulder and hip and so on. Whether we are aware of it or not, the same is true when it comes to people. One person's pain or rejoicing can have a ripple effect. Even though this is true, we can easily become disconnected from this reality. However, when we view ourselves as interconnected and interdependent, we realize that our neighbor's suffering is our own. So too is their rejoicing. And for this reason, when it comes to work, How others are compensated or treated by their employers should matter to us, both in sentiment and in action. So I realize that so far, a lot of this talk about body parts and work has been pretty abstract. So what are some of the practical steps we can take? My first practical suggestion is to consider your beliefs and assumptions around work and workers. Now, it is easy to agree in theory with the words of Dr. King. Whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. But just agreeing with this statement does not mean that we've actually stopped ranking workers and types of work. To discover what beliefs you might have internalized, it can help to consider some specific questions. And for the sake of these questions, I'm going to insert sanitation worker, but you can insert any type of work or any type of laborer. So the questions are, what might people in my life have said to me if I had pursued sanitation work? How would I feel about myself if I was engaged in sanitation work? How would I feel about my friend or my child pursuing sanitation work? How much do I know about the training of sanitation workers? How much do I know about the working conditions of sanitation workers? How much do I know about the compensation of sanitation workers? What are my beliefs around fair compensation for different types of work? Do I feel like my labor is more or less valuable than other types of work? Do I feel like my labor is being fairly compensated? When we really take the time to reflect on specific questions, it can be surprising to discover what messages or beliefs we are carrying inside of us. I know that I have found this to be true for me personally. Depending on what emerges for you, you may find yourself wanting to learn more about different types of work and workers. This may look like having a conversation with a neighbor or a friend or a relative, or jumping on the PowerPoint party trend, which you can just gather a group of people together and share presentations about different types of work, whether it be your own job or one that you researched. Or maybe you want to watch something like the docuseries Working, What We Do All Day. Based on what you learn, consider if there is a step you want to take to help bring greater esteem to a certain type of worker, or to help fight for better working conditions and compensation. My second practical suggestion is to learn about invisible labor. Have any of you heard this term before? Yeah, some of you. So invisible labor is that work that is often unseen, unrecognized, unpaid, and unpromotable. In homes and families, it can look like remembering birthdays, carrying on family traditions, meal planning, noticing and replenishing low supplies, keeping track of deadlines and due dates, and so on. In the workplace, it can look like tidying the office, taking notes during a meeting, providing emotional support to colleagues, mentoring new employees, and serving on diversity, equity, and inclusion committees. Now, this is definitely not universal because my husband is actually really good at this kind of stuff. But in general, this type of work disproportionately falls on women and people of color. Studies show that in the workplace, women of color, LGBTQ women, and women with disabilities are the most impacted. Invisible labor comes with a taxing mental and emotional load, which can lead to exhaustion and burnout. It can feel incredibly invalidating and dehumanizing to be overlooked and taken for granted. And it can negatively impact your career. When you are focused on invisible labor, you have less time and energy to put towards work that will be recognized and help you to be promoted, leading over the long run to less advancement and loss of wages. So what can we do about invisible labor? Well, the first step is to make it visible. Have a conversation with your partner or siblings or coworkers about the invisible labor in your family and work environments. Express gratitude towards those who've been carrying a disproportionate load and take steps to distribute tasks more equitably. In the workplace, consider compensation for certain tasks, as well as systems like scheduled rotations that ensure that everyone shares the load. My third practical suggestion is to spend time considering how your passions and skills intersect with the needs of the world. To return to Paul's body metaphor, instead of trying harder to be a hand, sometimes the foot needs to discover the amazing things it is capable of. Personally, it has taken me a long time to discover the type of work that is most in alignment with my skills, values, temperament, and passions. These days, you all know me as the executive pastor here at the River, but over the years, I have had many different jobs. My journey in the working world has been a winding one. I have worked as a sleepaway camp counselor, a campus tour guide, a college admissions interviewer, an operations manager for a modern dance company, a writer for a pop culture website, a marketer for a children's book publisher, a therapist at a mental health clinic, and here at the River in a number of positions. Some of these jobs I took because I needed the paycheck, and there is no shame in that whatsoever. All labor has dignity. At the same time, when we have the ability to pursue work that we might find more enjoyable or purposeful, or that will provide better compensation, working conditions, or work-life balance, we should do so. In Japanese culture, there is a helpful concept called ikigai. Ikigai is a broad concept that refers to the things that bring value and joy and zest to life, the things that make life worth living. These can be relationships with people, as well as activities like work and hobbies. When it comes to work, Ikigai advises that we seek the intersection of what we are good at, what we love, what the world needs, and what we can be paid for. Studies have shown that pursuing this intersection leads to increased satisfaction and more positive health outcomes compared to pursuing compensation alone. To this list, I would add that it's really important to find a positive working environment. Even if your work meets all the rest of the criteria, it can be really soul-sucking to work somewhere with a toxic culture or under a bad manager. Many of you may have already found the place where these circles intersect for you. Others of you may still be searching or experimenting. If that's you, try to be patient with the process. Sometimes it can take time to figure out if you are a hand or a foot or an ear or an eye. And it can also take time to discover all that you're capable of. After all, a foot may be capable of more than one function. Feet may be used to stand or walk or kick or dance or leap or climb and so much more. Paid work can be an important part of Ikigai, but it's not the only way to find meaning and joy in life. You may discover that what you are good at and what you love and what the world needs is not something that will pay you a living wage. Are there ways to pursue your reason for living outside of your paid labor? Or you may be retired or approaching retirement. How will you pursue purpose in this new chapter outside of your career? Or life may throw you a curveball, and you may be forced to take a step away from paid work. You may lose your job, or need to become a caregiver for a relative, or need to navigate your own health challenges or disability, or may be faced with some other circumstance beyond your control. If paid work is not an option, where will you find meaning and joy? We must remember that while paid work can be incredibly meaningful, it is not the only way to find joy or purpose in our lives, and it does not define our worth. I find today's passage from 1 Corinthians to be a very hopeful one. The good news of this passage is that even when we feel worthless, we are considered invaluable. Even when we think we are invisible, we are seen. And even when we are rejected, we are embraced. As humans, we make designations like valuable and worthless, in or out, one of us or part of the other. But the good news is that when it comes to people or their work, God does not adhere to our classifications. We can tell people that what they have to offer is not valuable, but that doesn't mean that that is true. We can tell individuals that they're no longer welcome in our human communities or meeting spaces or families, but we do not actually have the power to strip anyone of their inherent worth, to expel them from God's family, or to separate them from God's spirit. And no one on earth has the power to do any of that to us either. And thank God for that. So to close today, I'd like to invite the worship team back up. And as they come up, I would like to read a poem by Rosemary Watola Traumer called Belonging. And if it's true, we are alone together. The way blades of grass are alone, but exist as a field. Sometimes I feel it, the green fuse that ignites us, the wild thrum that unites us, an inner hum that reminds us of our shared humanity. Just as 35 trillion red blood cells join in one body to become one blood, just as 136,000 notes make up one symphony, alone as we are, our small voices weave into the one big conversation. Our actions are essential to the one infinite story of what it is to be alive. When we feel alone, we belong to the grand communion of those who sometimes feel alone. We are the dust that hopes, a rising of dust, a thrill of dust, the dust that dances in the light with all other dust, the dust that makes the world.